Welcome to Rauta. This video is done in commercial collaboration with our sponsor, Steelfest. Welcome to Rauta's Underground Trio video. Once again, we have three different styles to three different bands on the early stages of their career, and these are put from worst to best. That being said, let's go for the first band, and this time it's melodic death metal from Finland, actually from my home city of Turku, and this one is called Worldburn. This band was founded around 2017, and since then they have put out only one album, and this one is late 2022 album called Beholder. And this is a kind of a tricky album. Basically it taps into the early 90s stuff when melodic death metal was blending in with melodic black metal, that is kind of taking those raspier or shriekier or screamier vocals from melodic black metal side, but then incorporating elements from death metal, the lighter side of things, and making that to their own. I'm definitely talking about the kind of a Gothenburg era when In Flames, Dark Tranquility and all that stuff. And from Finland, bands like Children of Bodom started doing their own kind of a stuff, various styles and differences and all that stuff. Worldburn is basically tapping into the same vein, but they're more loyal to death metal than taking those screamier and shriekier parts of vocals. They actually include proper growly vocals in their death metal, but music is definitely on the melodic side. Now, it's not totally wrong if you're thinking of earlier days of, or even later days of Hypocrisy, the band from Sweden, when you're thinking about this, because after all, it's death metal with lots of melodies and still growlier parts. But it's not like Worldburn is right there. Actually, quite far from it, because this first album is much like sounding like a demo, just with the album amount of music, and it's actually one of the problems with this one. Now, overall, the songwriting is pretty lukewarm. It doesn't really annoy you, but it doesn't really please you. None of these tracks are like, wow, it's gonna make my eyebrows do wild movements. It's more like, yeah, work in progress. Me trying to kind of suffer it through without getting too negative here. But when you give this more and more spins, it kind of starts to emphasize the weak points of this album, and there are couples. First of all, like I said, the songwriting isn't exactly top notch. It's totally listenable, but once you're done with the album, it's not like it invokes you the feeling like, I gotta get back to it, it's so good. It's not. It is very much like demo level recording, and you're like, yeah, these guys will be somewhere after a couple of recordings more, but this is not the album that is going to make waves or big impact. The second thing is the production is actually quite weak. These are the kind of level of guitars we're talking about that you could do in a rehearsal room, but when you enter a real studio with someone who has any kind of understanding what a metal album is supposed to sound like, this is not the result you're happy with. It's not like it's shitty, but it's quite of a poor given the nowadays standards. Now, if we were living in, I don't know, late 80s, early 90s, this kind of album would have been quite okay, acceptable and all that stuff. But since then, a lot of progress, a lot of steps have been taken, and this is not gonna cut it. It sounds kind of like a demo indeed, in terms especially for the production. Now, when it comes to the growly vocals, sound the vocalist sound, the style is pretty okay, except it lacks dynamic. It's almost like when you have really good vocalists who are doing growly vocals, you can even hear different styles and layers with the vocal styles. I mean, there are kind of a deeper parts and higher parts, and it just kind of has kind of a flow which feels natural. Here it feels very, very monotone. So while I can say the growl in fact is kind of deep, it's more like saying the vocals in this style, there is no real color or change in the patterns and all that stuff, no ups and highs or lows and whatever. So it gets very boring. So I don't want to be mean to this band because I kind of hope they can make it, but this is not the album I'm gonna recommend and be honest at the same time. It's lukewarm at its best, very, very mediocre release, so can't really recommend it unless you're a hardcore fan of any new band doing melodic death metal. Not that given these days anyway. The next band comes from Brazil, and this is the Damnnation with two, or actually three N's in the name. So it's kind of a wordplay, damn and nation. That pun is not gonna fly, so it's already out by the time this one comes out. Now they also have one album out called Way of Perdition, which is here for review, a 2022 release. And this band was founded a few years earlier, so it's not like they started yesterday and now they have already an album out. What is interesting that after this one, it seems the band actually has a drummer, but with this album, it's a drum machine, and unfortunately one of the weak points on this album. This is thrash metal, but maybe not the ways that you're thinking about Brazilian thrash metal. This is not Sarcophago or Sepultura. This is way more modern ways of executing that. Now, I must say I like the vocals. The female vocalist is actually quite aggressive, and because of being a little bit high-pitchy, it's different than very, very many thrasher bands, which are more on the, lower sound, how they execute the vocals and all that stuff. So the vocals are actually pretty good. They're kind of uptight and something like, yeah, there is aggression, there is passion, there is hate. When it comes to the riffs, it's more like ups and downs. There are parts where it kind of gets the moment going and you're like, yes, this is going to cut it. And then there are parts where you're like, please, can you remove that riff from the equation? It's not that good. Overall, you would say 10 tracks, less than 40 minutes shouldn't be boring because, after all, it's pretty basic when it comes to the length of an album and for this kind of music. But unfortunately, it feels a tad bit too much. It's more like if only they had focused to take the best parts of this one, made it an MCD, EP with, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes, and then only pick the best parts of it. This could be pretty decent. But the drum machine, which is very mediocre and lots of those lukewarm points here and there, it's more like, yeah, this is not there yet. Kind of a mid album, much like the Worldburn one, but a tad bit better. Mainly because of the better vocals, a little bit better overall production. But the drum machine and those lukewarm middle riffs, not gonna cut it just yet. Will be interesting to see, however, where the Damnnation finally gets itself when it has a little bit more experience under the belt, like the saying goes. But for the first album, kind of forgettable. Which leaves us with the best album of the pile, and this comes from Belgium, Serpents Oath, with the second album, Ascension. Now the previous album, Nihil, was actually a good one. Not exactly top-notch album, but definitely something very, very promising. It's more like, let's take elements from Vatine and Dark Funeral and other Swedish bands with melodic aggressiveness, a little bit Marduk in the play, stir, shaken, whatever, and do it with a fast pace. And then you have this kind of a standard black metal vocal, standard black metal production, and you can pretty much call it somewhat of a B-level banger. B-level might sound a little bit too harsh, but I'm gonna say it like this. It's good, but not that great. Now, the second album is not exactly right there. It's more like, now what's happening so often, the first album has all the best ideas, then you do a second album with leftover riffs, and you feel like they're not that good as the first album. But it's not like the difference is big. It's more like these should have come out in kind of a different order. Let's put it this way. Ascension, if it had been the first album, you could say these guys have something going on, and Nihil would have been like, now they're nailing it and going to the proper direction. Now it seems like the opposite. Now the good thing here is the tracks are pretty, they're not too lengthy. This has like 12 tracks, 41 minutes, and it's pretty decent of a ride. That is, those fast tempo riffs, melodic parts, basic standard screamy, shrieky, raspy vocals, what have you, and the production kind of supporting the music. Very, very listenable. Now the downside is it's also too much of a forgettable kind. Now if you like bands like, say, Asakal from Finland, which have never been, in my opinion, top-notch Finnish black metal, Serpents Oath's second album is basically the same from Belgium. It's almost like the Swedish take of black metal done in Belgium ways, not exactly totally understanding what makes bands such as Marduk so good and consistent in quality, or later on Vatine. It's more like the Belgium take of Dark Funeral. Never top notch, but then again, still doing quite solid of a job. Now, where it boils down to is like, are you in for this kind of black metal? If you need more versatility, more variation, whatever, diversity, then Serpents Oath's probably not gonna do it. But still, it's pretty decent and listenable, and I could imagine this is an album that you could just spin along with your friends and without getting bothered or annoyed or bored. Or on stage, I could imagine these kind of songs would, just deliver solid stuff, but nothing like, wow, big world, big band, big memories, kind of a stuff. Anyway, best of the pile, so what are you waiting for? Click the links for music and all that stuff. You will find them in the description box, and then you can let me know if you liked any of the bands here in question. Let's hope Serpents Oath keeps progressing, and we'll hear from them later on again. Meanwhile, take care and enjoy some new music. Bye bye.